welcome to Brain Chat. I'm Dr. Mitzi Joy Williams, your board-certified neurologist and MS specialist, and my mission is to engage, educate, and empower those affected by MS to become an active part of their healthcare team. Here on Brain Chat, we'll be discussing all things MS, health and wellness, advocacy, and we'll even throw a little bit of music and music therapy in there as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode. Hello, happy Monday, everybody, and welcome to Brain Chat. It's Dr. Mitzi, the nerdy neurologist. I am so excited to be here with you guys on this Monday of MS Awareness Month. There's so many exciting events going on, and I am so pumped about the guests that I have hanging out with me tonight. I have two of my super friends that I'm going to bring up to the stage in a minute, but you know how we do on Brain Chat. Type in the chat. Let me know where you're logging in from. I bid you greetings from Atlanta, where it is 80 degrees. I don't know what degrees it's going to be. 60 when I walk out the house, 80 when I walk back in the house. There's no telling what's going on. But the sun is shining here, and we've got some great information to get across to you tonight on Brain Chat. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my amazing guests. I have with me Dr. Heidi Creighton, who is an amazing neurologist, MSologist, as the new term goes. And she is the medical director of the Greater Washington Multiple Sclerosis Center. She actually has worked in academic settings. She was at Georgetown, and currently her MS center is the only freestanding non-academic MS center in the Mid-Atlantic. So she does some amazing work as a clinician, as a researcher, as a speaker, both nationally and internationally. And I am so honored that she's coming to hang out with me today. Welcome, Dr. Creighton. And also we have Tyler Campbell, powerhouse speaker, MS advocate, author, radio show host, real life, real talk, all the things. It is always a good time with Tyler. So I am so excited to have these two amazing folks with me tonight. And welcome to Brain Chat, Dr. Creighton and Tyler. Happy Monday.
Hey. Happy
What's
Monday.
going on?
Let's go. Hey, listen, Dr. Creighton came in there with that Fat Albert. Hey.
Right.
Hey.
I have not thought about Fat Albert in quite some time. Thank you for sparking that memory.
Mitzi,
Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah, I remember.
Nice.
Yeah, it's Fat Albert. All right. Okay, so let's get right into it. So, whenever we start a show on Brain Chat, just for those who may be new tuning in or those who may not have met you on previous episodes, we'll start with Tyler. Tell us a little bit about your journey into the world of MS and your diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed as a college student. In that age bracket, I was 21 years old. So kind of that younger demographic with MS back in 2007. And Mitzi, I think the main thing is I was diagnosed very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and if I have to be honest, and feel free as MSologists, the both of you to chime in. I learned honestly that the earlier I was diagnosed, that's almost what the man of above blessed to save my life.
Mm.
That is not everybody else's reality. But that is the thing that keeps me humble. And that's why I advocate so much now. The more we speak, the more awareness that is raised, the more things like Brain Chat that are available. We are helping people to learn those symptoms, stay in tune with it, and to get diagnosed early. It can help you out tremendously.
Absolutely. And what about you, Dr. Creighton? How did you get into the wonderful world of MS? Because I did a fellowship with one of our colleagues, Dr. Mary Hughes, one of my mentors and really good friends. But when I was coming along, fellowship or training in MS was really a new thing. And so people who were in the field of MS really did it because they loved it and they loved working with the people. And they just kind of, forged this path, so that many of us could, go on to do extra training, to focus on this area and to focus on helping people with MS. So tell us a little bit about how you got interested or how you got into the field.
I really wanted to be a stroke neurologist because I really wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something that would actually be able to help people. And it was my mentor, the person who was doing MS at Georgetown, who said, "I really think you should do this." And I said, but I want to do something where I can really help people. And
Mm,
he just kind of said, "No, this is, I think you really, really, really would love this." And he knew me better than I knew myself because I fell madly head over heels in love with MS.
yeah.
So I did
Come
it kind of
on.
because I was kind of steered in that direction,
Yeah.
and I just have never looked back. I can't imagine doing anything else. Just like you,
Yeah.
we love it.
Amazing, amazing. And so, every medical specialty, for those who are watching Brain Chat, if you don't know, we all make fun of each other. And so the thing that they used to say about neurologists was that what we diagnose and say
And
adios because we couldn't
adios.
do anything about the conditions, but that has not been the case with MS. And it's been so exciting to see how things have changed over time and how we have so many options and we can really manage it a lot better than we could even, 10, 15 years ago. But just so everybody makes fun. I won't say what we say about other people, but that's what they used to say about us. But I think that's no longer the case because there
Woo,
are many
child. I'm
things
so happy I
we
didn't hear that going into the clinic. Adios.
Exactly.
Woo.
diagnose and adios. That's what they used to say back in the
Because
day.
there was nothing that you
It
could
was
do. There was really
necessary.
Yeah.
nothing to do but pat people on the back, give them some steroids, and say,
Yeah.
"Well, let me know if you have something else, any other fire I need to put out." But there was nothing to do to prevent
Yeah.
those events from happening. And
Yeah.
everything is different now.
It is. And what an exciting time. All right. So let's kind of get into this topic of MS awareness. This is MS Awareness Month. And I think one of the things that really came to mind with this episode, and you all are so eloquent with kind of expressing things about the diagnosis and, giving tips for people to move forward is I first want to talk about some of the statistics, right? So our understanding, obviously the way that we treat MS has changed over time, but our understanding of MS has also changed over time. So we know that it affects often people in their 20s to 40s, right? Tyler, you said you were 21 when you were diagnosed. We know that many of the people living in the US right now with MS are actually in their 50s and 60s, right? The largest population of people right now who are diagnosed in the States are between that age group, right? So people are living longer, right? There are different things that we need to be thinking about. We know it affects women more than men. That's something we know in a long time. And we also know that there are different ethnicities that may be more affected than others, right? So more studies are suggesting that MS occurs much more commonly in Black and Hispanic populations than we previously thought. So, there's a lot that we're learning kind of about the statistics. Is there anything else that you would add, Dr. Creighton, about kind of what we know about MS in the US in particular?
We've always talked about the fact that Black men have the most involved MS. That's certainly always been the population that we really, really are hyper focused on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always been very interesting to me that the statistics actually show that Black women have a much, much higher incidence than Black men. Black men really pretty equivalent to white men. And Black women are, 1 to 1.5 times more likely they have a higher incidence. So that I think is always, whenever I hear that, and I hear it repeatedly, and I'm always a little bit taken aback by that because I used to be so focused on the Black male experience.
Yeah.
But and my practice is certainly showing that to be true. I think yours, I assume yours is too. We see
Absolutely.
a lot more Black women coming in through the door, and
Mm-hmm.
it's surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what do you think about this number, right? So, prior to 2018, the MS Society, they came out with this study in 2018 telling us that nearly 1 million people in the US had MS. And I found it very interesting because prior to that, we would just kind of double the number every decade or so, right? When I first started practicing, it was 200,000 and then magically it was 400,000. Now we know it's 1 million, right? And when you think about the incidence around the world, which is estimated to be 2.8 million, that means over a third of people living with MS live in
There's a
the
lot of
States,
MS out there. There's a lot of
which is,
MS out there.
I think that's really striking. I think we don't talk about that enough.
Mhm.
Tyler, as a person living with MS, when you were first diagnosed, have you seen a big difference in, the number of people around you that or kind of who's in your sphere of influence who's been diagnosed? Do you notice a difference now than you did when you were first diagnosed?
Honestly, I'm gonna be real. I feel a lot ease of pressure
Mm-hmm.
for explanation of the diagnosis if I'm
Mm-hmm.
winding back to 2007. And I don't, there's a lot of things that I, that kind of tug at me a little bit, but I feel upbeat whenever I know that individuals are newly diagnosed and
Mhm.
it's not so much of a foreign language to the
Mm,
rest of the world.
yeah.
And I get excited about that. That's why things like what we're doing tonight and what you all have been literally fighting for all of your careers. When you look at a newly diagnosed population, I get excited because there's more of a discussion now.
Right.
There's a long way to go down this road. That's why we're
Mhm.
still here doing what we're doing.
Right.
But it is a heck of a lot better for me to hear more conversations about MS than it was back in 2007, y'all.
Yeah.
And so when I think of somebody newly diagnosed, already going through their go through, having to figure out a whole new world, the
Right.
fact that they have the higher chance of meeting someone, talking with someone, having more people on their job who are aware. And y'all don't know about y'all, but I look at job applications nowadays when I see them from other people or when I walk into different professions and there's a check mark for multiple sclerosis. And y'all
Wow.
all know that that
Right.
was not the
It
same.
was not
You had
there.
people entering the workforce
Right.
who would rather not say anything
Mhm.
out of worry because it wasn't even something that was recognizable and that could have stood in the way between you and your employment.
Right. Right.
So those are my different changes now that
Yeah.
I take the other route. I get excited about. I'm not saying I want you to have MS, but
Right.
but my goodness, it's better than 2007 and beyond. Those in the 50s and 60s of what they had to go through at their age. Now, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I
that's
hear
what I
that all the time. I actually hear exactly what you were just talking about all the time when somebody's kind of newly diagnosed or the diagnosis is confirmed and the next visit they say, somehow I heard about this person and this person and this person I work with and then my best friend, her best friend, like all these people come out of the woodwork and before people know it, they have this community of people that they even knew and didn't know that they had MS. And
Absolutely.
it's not this big secret anymore.
Agreed, agreed. It's kinda like when you buy a new car, right? So I bought this Hyundai not too long ago, and I never saw it on the road, and then once I got one, looked like I saw them everywhere. Everybody had my car in the same color, and so it's kinda the same with MS, a simple analogy, but a lot of my patients like, "I don't know anybody that has it," and then they go home and that next
Yes,
visit,
you
as
do.
you said, Dr. Creighton, it's like, "Uh, well, my cousin and the lady next door and the lady at church
Yes.
and then the other person down the street, all these people have MS, right? So
Everybody has MS.
everybody
yeah,
has
everybody
MS. So
has
we
it.
want to raise awareness, right? Because despite the fact that people are getting diagnosed much more frequently than they were before, there's still some barriers and there's still some people that aren't coming to diagnosis early. So I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about symptoms. One of the things that people often come into the office and talk to me about is, they had something dramatic, like they lost vision in an eye, and that may have led to diagnosis. But then when we start digging, it's like, for the past couple years, when I go walking with my auntie, my leg has been dragging and it starts slapping the ground. And I'm like, well, what happened? Like, why didn't you come see somebody about like it's not normal for your leg to be dragging, right? So let's talk about some of the symptoms and some of the things that people should be on the lookout for. So Tyler, start with you and tell us a little about the symptoms that led to your diagnosis.
Yeah, and I work really hard, Dr. Creighton. Dr. Missy knows this. Like I really try to look back over my life and evaluate. And I've been really, really hard on myself in terms of the years before getting
Mm.
diagnosed. And if I had to be open and honest about it, and I wrote about it a lot, I experienced chronic fatigue more than anybody else on my football team. MS was giving signs that your body isn't necessarily right if I'm looking at my ages of 19 and 20 upon getting to California for college.
Mm,
And so if I want to be honest, when and instead of saying something, I worked harder, which was not beneficial to my body, putting it into overload and finally having that aha moment of waking up and falling flat on my face. But if Tyler has to be honest, Tyler could have took the early signs that his body was putting before him, before the paralysis, before the uncontrollable neck jerking twitch,
mm,
the slurred speech. And those were the official things that led to the MS diagnosis. But I didn't know that fatigue could very well have been a hint that
Mhm.
something may not be right with your body.
Yeah.
Check in with
Yeah.
that. And I think so. I say those other things all the time, but I had fatigue issues for 2 years going to California versus growing up, in Texas. And
Hmm.
I,
So
I
you had
kick myself for
fatigue,
that. Hmm.
and then you had weakness, and that's what sent you to the doctor. You tried to get up and walk, and then you couldn't
Hmm.
walk.
And uncontrollable twitch.
And
Yes, ma'am.
uncontrollable twitching. Wow. So let's pause right there for a second. And Dr. Creighton, let's talk about this thing that's been, kind of brewing, so to speak, in the MS community, in terms of in the scientific community, about this MS prodrome, right? So what we're finding is that people come to diagnosis with some type of dramatic symptom, right? Either lose vision, or like Tyler, you get up and try to walk and you can't walk. But we're trying to learn more about what we call this prodrome, which are kind of the symptoms that could be leading up to MS, right? And so we're finding that, maybe the couple years or even up to 10 years before diagnosis, people start going to the doctor for things like fatigue, other things that we can't quite put our finger on. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we all hear this story. I saw a gentleman who I diagnosed as a grown up, 40s, and interestingly, he had been treated for erectile dysfunction as an early 20-year-old.
Mm,
Mhm.
And I said, now call me foolish, but call me presumptuous, but I think that that's probably something to question in a 20-year-old, where the
20-year-old.
wind goes by and
They get
this is not a
excited.
Say
problem
that, Doc.
for
Say that, Doc.
a $20, a
Hey.
20-year-old guy. I mean,
Snap your
come on.
fingers. Doesn't take
Like,
much.
what kind of urologist, and he was actually seen by a urologist, what kind of urologist thought that that was normal?
Right.
And that was over a decade ago.
Mm.
What kind of urologist would even write that prescription and tell a young man that this is a normal thing? So it isn't always like, Tyler, you say, you kind of have beaten yourself up over the years about ignoring some of that, but it's not always the person who's experiencing it. A lot of times those things can be explained away, or you think they certainly can. But when you have the medical community that also doesn't do their due diligence and
Right.
investigate a little further with things
Right.
that kind of don't make sense in a
Right.
young adult,
Healthy person.
healthy person,
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a problem as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And when we think about common symptoms of MS, certainly we've mentioned a couple of things. Numbness and tingling can be a common one. People can have it, on one side of their body. Symptoms can be mistaken as a stroke. Sometimes it's in both of their legs or in one leg. People can also have weakness, like dragging their foot or a foot drop. Um, Loss of vision is a very common symptom that we see with MS. And it's one of the ones that's pretty easy for people to recognize and kind of send you to a neurologist. But sometimes it's those other things like bowel or bladder issues, in a young person who hasn't
Yes.
had 10 babies and doesn't have a
Right.
reason to, lose control of their bladder, those types of things. I think it's just really important for people to listen to their bodies, right? And if something is wrong, to get that checked out. And so, I think if there's any message to get across, is whether you have MS currently or you don't, or you're concerned about it, if you're having symptoms and your body's not right,
And
go
that
see your
very,
doctor
very
and get that
important.
checked out, right? That's the
Very,
key.
very important.
Don't power through it. Don't be the strong person. You know what I mean? If your foot is dragging, go to the doctor, right? Okay.
Get that checked out.
Get
No,
that
that's
checked out. Please.
People always say, even when they're newly diagnosed, they say, so what sorts of things should I be on the lookout for? What should I be paying attention to?
Yeah.
What signifies a relapse? And I say, you know what? First of all, you have to know your body. You have to know what's your norm, and anything that's abnormal, you need to check in. I'm not going to give you a list of things that you might experience, might not experience. Everybody's different, and everybody's different in how they experience various symptoms. If it's abnormal for you, you got to get it looked at.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Take the cape
So,
off, Superman. Take the cape off.
right, take the
Yeah,
cape
exactly.
off. take the
Exactly.
cape off, Superman and Superwoman. All right,
Mhm.
so we talked a little bit about symptoms. Let's talk about how MS is diagnosed, right? So there are lots of people who say, I have all the symptoms of MS, but my MRI is normal, or my MRI looks like this, but I don't have any symptoms. Or, I get a lot of folks who say, my whoever cousin said I had MS, or who so how do we diagnose it? So Tyler, tell us a little bit about the process that you went through to get diagnosed.
Yeah, absolutely. And as again, I was a college student and I had access to trainers being a football player. So when I went to go see the team doctor is automatically thinking neurological something. I
Mhm,
talking with the trainers, I learned he was thinking stroke, but he immediately sent me to Scripps La Jolla Hospital to see
mhm,
a neurologist. So failed the team doctor's physicals, then you go to La Jolla, and while I'm in La Jolla, because I was an athlete, it was a little bit more rushed, maybe a little bit more pressure to get an
mhm,
answer.
mhm,
Um, Spinal tap, Mitzi. Within the next day, I was there. Then I had to come back the next day to get a spinal tap. So I went in for an appointment, and the doctor says we got to come back. And then the next day, I was able to also get imaging done and set up at a location that was nearby my campus. So
mhm.
within a week, guys, of my episode, I was diagnosed.
Wow.
Right.
That is extremely, extremely quick. But I was
Yeah.
blessed enough to be around the resources, and that's not always the case for anyone underserved, anybody in rural areas, just anybody in general. Even if you're
Mhm.
in the city, that's
Yeah.
not normal. But
Right.
that's why I said I know that was one of the things that really helped me in terms of getting to a place of getting those DMTs early
Mhm.
on in my diagnosis.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is amazing, and that is, what ideally we would love, right? If
Right.
people had
Yeah.
symptoms and got diagnosed extremely quickly.
Yeah.
But what kind of tests, Dr. Creighton, are done? So Tyler mentioned the MRI, he mentioned a spinal tap. What are those tests for, and kind of what do they tell us in diagnosing somebody with MS?
I would just kind of back up a little bit and
Sure.
just say that the most important thing, I think, is really the history. And I see people sometimes that I'm the third person that they're seeing.
Hmm.
And if you just listen to the story, I kind of walk out saying, how could this not be diagnosed?
Right.
This person sitting in front of me has so clearly told me this story.
Right.
So first and foremost is listen to the story.
Right.
And then imaging, of course, imaging has really changed everything for us because
Mhm.
imaging has made it much, much easier to be able to diagnose somebody with MS. It used to be that you just had clinical elements, and sometimes people didn't have things happen for years and
Mhm.
years in between. So it would take a decade, 2 decades to diagnose
Right.
somebody, and so much was already done by that point
Right.
of time in their lives. So imaging has certainly made that much, much, much easier to do MRI scans. And when we see little white spots, part of the workup is always to do blood work to rule out other reasons for little white spots,
Right.
to rule out other autoimmune conditions, infectious diseases, just to make sure that we really have ruled out other things that can be causative agents.
Mhm.
And sometimes spinal tap. Some
Mhm.
people do spinal taps routinely. I personally don't. If I have enough information, then I don't do it. I do it if I really
Yeah.
need more information.
Yeah, and the imaging has gotten so much better now,
It's
so
gotten
it
great.
I mean, so think about your cell phone back in, 2000, and the types of pictures, the really grainy ones that we were
Good
sending to each
analogy.
other, and now you got like 4D ultra,
Yes.
cameras. So the MRI technology has improved significantly. So there's a lot we can see now that we couldn't see, particularly in the spinal cord imaging,
Yes.
that we couldn't see a long time ago. So that
And,
makes it a lot easier.
and Mitzi, comfort for the patient.
Mhm.
I was of the last, I think, transition of the enclosed MRIs that were in the older hospitals still kind of, and so a lot of people dealing with claustrophobia and all those
Yeah,
other things. That's even for more of a reason why they're thinking I don't want to pursue down that avenue, and those are not the case of my
absolutely.
times anymore.
Absolutely, absolutely. So MRIs, right? The history is
Mhm.
extremely important.
Yeah.
Spinal tap in some cases may help us, in a tiebreaker, maybe.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that we kind of put together to make a diagnosis, right? In order for someone to be diagnosed with MS, they have to have, essentially spots in different areas of the brain or the spine, as well as several episodes of inflammation, right? In the past, you had to have two actual episodes of symptoms, but now we know that we can see if we look at your MRI and you have a new spot, that can count kind of as a new episode in a different area. So the diagnosis has gotten a lot easier, and we're trying to diagnose people earlier and earlier so that they can be put on effective treatment as early as possible. So let's kind of, think about, so we talked about kind of the symptoms, we talked about how it's diagnosed. Why is it important for us to raise awareness about MS? So I have a whole show about MS, so I know it's important, but for people out there, we're talking about a disease that affects 1 million people in the US. I don't know how many million people there are in the US, but it's more than one. So why is it important for us to raise awareness about this condition and to make sure that people are, checking in with their neurologist, or if they're having neurologic symptoms, that they're getting assessed? I'll start with you, Tyler.
So I love music, Missy, and there was a song by the Dramatics. I'm thinking old school when I'm
Oh
cleaning
yeah.
up, and my
Oh
mama
yeah.
would
Fly
make me listen.
collar,
Yeah, my mama would make
bell
me listen to
bottoms.
her music, and there was a song that came on called "What You See Is
Is
What
what
You
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 Get,"
get.
get. Du, du,
and
du, du, du.
y'all know the
Yeah.
tune. And so the reason why it is so important, I didn't see somebody that looked like me um around my age. We talked about this, Missy. Like I needed to see somebody who wasn't suffering through MS,
Mm,
who didn't sound like what the majority of the stories were that were out there.
mhm,
Those things that caused me not to bat an eye towards researching the disease further, because Google or life didn't put anybody before me that showed me promise.
mm,
And so, as a man, I've talked about it. I did not feel I was worthy enough to be loved by somebody.
mm,
But had I been able to see someone who had love, who had a family, who had a support system, who had a team, then I would have felt like I can go out and get that.
right.
And I found that, but it was later and it was Montel Williams for me. But in the initial, my goodness, I needed to see somebody who had that, somebody who would tell that story, somebody who looked like me, somebody who was living it and doing it big with multiple sclerosis. I didn't find it.
Mm, mm,
And so changing that narrative and getting to what you see is what you get is what it's all about now. And they need to get more stories like Don. They need to get more stories of family members and fathers loving on their daughter and being at doctor's appointments with their son. And it's everybody's MS, and that is out there. We need to see more of it, and having more and more people talking about their stories is
right.
one of the greatest things that we could have. Having them on Facebook, having them on Instagram, taking them into a doctor's experience, having things like that. Yeah, what you see is what you get with MS. That's what I
Hmm.
want.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts, Heidi?
I think it's really, really important now more than ever because there's so much that we can do
Mm,
and there's so much that we can offer. And we know that this is an ongoing, right? By definition, this is an ongoing process. So the goal is to stop it now. And we're going to have a much better outcome stopping it now versus 5, 10 years down the road. We, at this point, cannot repair the nervous system. So the only thing that we can do to really impact this condition is to not let bad stuff happen. And we
right.
have the ability to do that. So
Hmm.
it's frustrating to see somebody who has not been able to reap the benefits of that. So that's why awareness really needs to be raised. That's why we need to really push for people who have anything that's abnormal to go get checked out and to start medicine sooner than later, to kind of help people pull their head out of the sand a little bit
Right.
and rein in the denial because, yeah, it's scary, but it's going to be a lot more scary if we continue denial, continue allowing denial to run one's life. So that's
Absolutely.
why awareness is so, so important because there's
Yeah.
so much to be done.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting. So, Tyler, when you said what you see is what you get, I didn't know that was the direction you were going in. The direction I was thinking about when you say what you see is what you get is kind of this thought um, that time is brain. We talk about it with
Mhm.
stroke, but we don't talk about it with multiple sclerosis, right? So, what you see is what you get means, as Heidi so eloquently stated, once that damage is done, this is what we're working with. Right now, we can try to prevent it from getting worse, and in many cases there are things we can do to help with some symptoms, but what we're working with right now, it may not get completely back to normal, but we can try to keep it from getting worse. And so we want to make sure that what we see is as close to normal as possible.
Yes.
And that's why we want to have people diagnosed early. We want people to, consult with neurologists. We want them to see MS specialists, right? We want them to, be aware of the options that are available so that we can get on top of it and try to treat it, as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. So, what are you all excited about? So, in the field of it, there's so much to be excited about, right? But what are you all excited about in, the MS community, in the MS space? Like, I can talk forever about things that I'm excited about, but I want to start with you guys. Tyler, tell us what you're excited about in the patient community. I love how you talked about seeing people, who are living with MS and thriving and raising their kids and their families. What are you excited about that's going on in the community?
So I work with a lot of student athletes in my time, right? And Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, like all these different types of athletes. And I've met runners
Mm,
with MS. I've met hockey players, basketball players. I see people who are putting their bodies through grueling tasks day in and day out, right? More extreme, right, than your average individual. Missy, they doing it.
mm,
And they're doing it with flying colors. Um, so I get excited because I know there are younger generations coming up, and because of all the medical advances, again, because of the stories, because of the willingness to step over what was once considered a boundary of things that you weren't supposed to do with
mm,
the disease, out of a caution and out of a love, that boundary is getting pushed even further and further out, and I'm seeing it.
mm.
I've had conversations, like it's not just a figment of the imagination. So I come from the athletic standpoint, having the sports background and just feeling like the only one. And now I have seen it. High schoolers, goodness, they were diagnosed early, but still
Mm.
they're doing it. And way better than me, Mitzi. Like they actually talking about it. Like they have a one-on-one conversation with their coaches. The community knows that they have MS, the athletic centers, the colleges that are recruiting them, and they're still getting
Recruited.
scholarships.
Wow. I love it. I
That
love it.
that selfishly, from a student athlete standpoint, I'm gonna send it, small my population a lot more. But from as a former student athlete, that, and then they're getting the resources they need right off the bat for what they need in the classroom.
Amazing.
That's all I could ask for.
Amazing. What about you, Heidi?
I think it's so exciting that we have so many different mechanisms of action to treat MS. Just like everybody's MS is different, every person with MS is unique. Their needs are very different. Their MS is very different. And we like to kind of pigeonhole with these categories people's MS, but I really truly believe MS is kind of a spectrum,
Yeah.
and people fall different places on that spectrum. So to be able to have different mechanisms of action, to be able to target what we might think the major issue is with that person's MS, makes it so incredibly exciting. And to have all these different options, it's not that all these medicines do the same thing. They all have different nuances and different ways of working. And so to be able to look at somebody's particular kind of MS, look at their lifestyle, the person they are, what kind of life they want, and put all that together into a different mechanism of action of a drug and really tailor a product for that particular patient, oof, I mean, that's exciting. That's
Yeah.
really, really exciting.
Yeah.
This is not a one size fits all. Otherwise, we would be bored out of our mind and we would not
Absolutely.
have the passion for MS that we do. It's because it's so individual and it's mixing a different cocktail for each patient, and to have their input. And, what are your expectations? What do you want out of your MS? What are your life goals? Tell me about you so I can kind of mix this concoction that's just for you, based on your particular MS. That's what is exciting to me.
Yeah.
And we have so many options to do that.
Yeah, I used to have this.
Y'all have me so excited because I don't get this perspective from the doctors, and I forget y'all have been through these different stages of progression with awareness in medicine and support. For heaven's
Yeah.
sake, support. And so I'm watching you all smile because I know that you are loving your work.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's like y'all, it's an adventure for you, and you have resources.
Absolutely.
And so I hope more patients or people who are I hope they'll watch this and hear, man, they'll feel y'all's energy. Gee, I want to feel it.
Yeah, I think I'm excited about a lot of things. Like, well, I get excited easily, but but I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is achieving this goal. I tell my patients when they come in to see me that my goal is to have social visits where we talk about their MS for 5 minutes.
Coffee chat.
Look over those MRIs, and then we talk about where you went on vacation. And I get so excited when someone comes in and I'm like, "How you doing?" And they're like, "Great." And I'm like, anything going on?" "Nope." And I'm like, "Okay, show me those baby pictures." So what concert did you go to? We're going to go see Usher in, Vegas. And so that is what I'm excited about. Just being able to do that and really being able to focus on
to see
wellness.
people for the actual person that they are and not for their MS.
Yes. And to focus on things like wellness, because, we were so bogged down, and we still do a lot of symptom management, but we were just so bogged down with trying to figure out how can we get you sleeping through the night with your spasticity and all of this, that I didn't have time to tell you about a diet or a little bit of exercise or yoga or meditation and mindfulness, and, all of that, because we were just so focused. We had such a laundry list of things to cover at each visit that we couldn't even focus on kind of giving you the tools to improve your everyday life with MS. And so I think that is something that I'm really excited about. And I really am also excited about so many amazing patient advocates like you, Tyler, kind of lifting your voice, talking to the masses, letting people know, that you can live well with MS. And I think that we just didn't see that, in the past. And so those are things I'm super excited about. So we have a couple questions, and I want to address these questions that are in the chat before we, begin to round up, because the time is winding down already. It's always a good time with y'all. So there was one question about open MRIs. So we talked about diagnosis. We talked about imaging as one of the primary things we use to diagnose MS. What are your thoughts about open MRIs? So certainly the MRIs are not the old ones that we used to do way back in the day. But Dr. Creighton, what are your thoughts about people doing open MRIs for their MS? Right. Thumbs down.
I was hearing you, Tyler. I was hearing you. I was feeling you. I totally understand, but the pictures just aren't so great. But I give everybody fairy dust. Anybody and everybody who needs a little fairy dust to get through that machine, I will give fairy dust all day long, so I can get a really, really good
Valium,
picture. So
all the dust.
Open MRIs are just not always as good. And so it's kind of a waste of time and anxiety being on the table when you can't even really get any great information from it. So got to get in that machine and have some fairy dust to go along with it.
Yes. Take a little nap, do a little snoring.
Exactly.
Come out feeling nice. I'll never forget. I gave a I gave a patient some fairy dust. We used to do a lot of these spinal taps in the office. I don't know if you still do them, Dr. Creighton, but we used to do them in the office back in the day. And so I frequently gave people fairy dust. Uh, I remember so many people, were like, this one lady was like, Dr. Mitzi, I don't feel anything. And she's like, I was like, ma'am, you're feeling mighty nice. So we want you feeling nice when you go get that MRI. Okay. We want you feeling nice.
I wish I
Okay.
would have. Oh,
Yeah,
that final tap. I wasn't
take a
ready for
little nap.
that.
Oh yeah, yeah. So,
Yes.
next question: are there any links to frequent viral infections prior to the prodrome and early days of MS? I'll give that one to you, Dr. Creighton.
So, we've always talked about there being some infectious agent that is involved in that confluence of things that happens for MS to occur. And for a long time, it was, a couple of different viruses kind of entered the playing field. And I think we finally have settled once and for all on Epstein-Barr virus. Epstein-Barr virus is the virus that is known to cause infectious mononucleosis, or Tyler, you're very familiar with chronic fatigue syndrome. So oftentimes we know that people who have MS have usually had mono or Epstein-Barr infection, but not everybody with a history of mono or Epstein-Barr infection has MS. So that part is our missing link there. But there's not really correlation necessarily with just general repeated viral infections and having a diagnosis of MS. There's no correlation there. But we do think that there is some correlation between early infection with Epstein-Barr virus and subsequent diagnosis of MS.
Absolutely. And I think you said that you hit the nail on the head. So last kind of round robin, right? So we talked about what we're excited about in the field of MS. Are there any events during MS Awareness Month that you all are excited about participating in or that are going on in your area?
I'm right here. It's only the 6th, and I'm here with you guys today. I mean, it just can't get better than this. And this is at the beginning of my month, for goodness sakes. Gosh.
Awesome sauce. What about you, Tyler? I still have never made it to the barbecue event that you.
No, don't worry, Missy. I got something in store for you. I put some stuff on for this.
All right.
For me, so I'm bummed because I throw my annual charity function. We missed it, so we made it April the 1st, right? So
okay.
I'm not gonna go that route. But what I was blessed for, and it was kind of like I'm gonna do this selfishly, a gift from me, right? There were 3 students at the University of Texas who have worked for over two and a half years to put together their podcast of my life story. So they went back, they interviewed doctors, my mother, my father, my aunts, my uncles, coaches, people. They found people. I don't even know how they found all these people. And they put together a 5-episode podcast for the month of March in honor of multiple sclerosis awareness. And so it was a gift to me. And they continued the project even after a year after they graduated. So they got it to it in their junior year and kept going. And now they have jobs and they just now finished. And so I was excited. It meant a lot for them. One of the students, her aunt has MS. So it meant something to her heart. And that's what you were talking about earlier, Dr. Creighton. You start to meet different people and form a community. I never knew this person would find my story. So that was special. And they put together a podcast on Spotify and Apple, and they called it A Campbell Never Quits Podcast in honor of multiple sclerosis awareness.
Who's cutting onions in here?
That was special, right? They're of a different generation. They're just college kids, like they So I'm thankful. That's
amazing.
it. Push the ball forward.
So how can we find the podcast?
Yeah, it's on Spotify and Apple, and it's called A Campbell Never Quits, and it's like it's just all the training, like all the interactions you talked about, the trainers, the doctor. Like I haven't had those discussions with people since I was in college. Some of these people I haven't talked to in ages, and it wasn't about MS. So it's all around those things, and I I was thankful. I thought they were amazing. Y'all don't give up hope in the next generation. There's some good ones out
Wow.
there.
Amazing, amazing. Well, obviously, I'm excited to be here with two of my favorite superstars because, it is always a good time with you guys. I think I am excited about a documentary that Tyler and Don Morgan and I participated in about MS in the Black community. And we had a movie premiere with the popcorn and the snacks and all the things. And that is going to air on PBS sometime in the next month or so. So that was really, really exciting. Tyler is prophesying we're gonna get us an Emmy, so we'll see what happens.
Come on. You got to
But
speak it into existence. What you see is what you get,
that's
Mitzi.
right. I'm
That's
gonna be
right.
singing that the rest of the night, right? Okay.
Totally. Totally.
Dun, 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 dun. Right. So, but yeah, there's just so many amazing things. There's so many MS walks going on around the country. I encourage everyone to see what's going on in your community, see how you can get involved, join the movement, let your voice be heard, tell your stories. You never know who is listening and who will be blessed by you just talking about your MS and letting other people know that they're going to be okay. So, with that being said, we are at the end of our time. Thank you guys so much for spending part of your Monday night with me and with our Brain Chat friends. And don't forget to go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the things iHeart, download and subscribe to the podcast. And I will see everyone again in 2 weeks. Have a great night, everybody.